This is Aaron again. I'm here with another topic I'm going to be speaking on. It is September 7th, in the year 2020. Today I'm going to be talking about, probably my most controversial topic. Well, it's going to become controversial. People aren't going to think right away that it is. Or maybe they will. But it's going to be on protesting. It's going to be also, can't mention protesting without mentioning Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter and peaceful protesting. Firstly, protesting in and of itself is displaying some type of grievance with some type of other party. It could be another person, it could be an established organization, it could be some type of piece of legislature or whatever, what have you. You can protest pretty much anything that you disagree with. We commonly use it today when it has something to do with the government or some type of large corporation that is very affluent and has a lot of pull and clout in society. And these particular specific times, it's mostly for political and civil, rights disputes or racial tensions and whatnot, which is why we have Black Lives Matter. Let's speak on that topic first. Of course, obvious to anyone who speaks English, it is a statement, a factual statement. Black Lives Matter. You can agree or disagree with it. It doesn't change any validity in the point that is being made, and whatever. You can feel however you want to feel about it. It doesn't change the statement. It doesn't change it to false, or it's just an obvious statement that people can make. And then, since it is such an obvious statement, it is why would people make such a statement? People would make such a statement if they believe that people are not aware of it. They aren't aware that Black Lives Matter. And of course, by Black lives is meaning black people. People who are considered black, like me. So people would make that statement if they believe that people don't understand the statement. And you would say, why would they assume that people don't understand? Of course, they would assume such by the people's actions, by what people allow to happen to people who are black. Whether you consider police brutality, whether you consider, just the overall dysfunction of the way that blacks are treated in society, saying things like, black on black crime, when all races commit crime, especially violent crime, intraracially, which means that the people who are the offender and the people who are being offended are of the same ethnicity. Chinese people committing crime against Chinese people, what have you, whites committing crime against white, but you don't hear Chinese on Chinese crime. You don't hear white on white crime. You could say, I've already covered this in a different video, my first video in fact, that you can argue that, black people commit crime at more rates, but none of that matters in the way that the crimes are being presented and who they are saying that fault lies with. Because in school shootings and mass shootings, and when white criminals have white victims and some of the most heinous crimes throughout the history of mankind, nobody brings up that, this is just an instance of white on white crime. White people need to get their stuff together and stop shooting up schools. No, nobody says that, because it's just a tragedy. It's just a criminal being a criminal and being disingenuine to life itself, committing a crime. So that's why, we as black people, we get a different narrative, so we have a different response when, we are being treated unfairly, which is why a good amount of black people feel as though they need to tell other people who aren't black that black lives actually hold value because they're being treated as if they don't. So that's why somebody would say such a obvious statement and feel as though it's obligatory, like it has to be done. Like the thing that confuses me so much is that people get so angry when people say such an obvious statement, and they feel as though that, oh, we're treating black people fairly, but how can you say that unless you have a conversation with the people who disagree? So the thing is, you feel as though you're treating this person fairly, you're being fair in the relationship, but they disagree. So therefore, how can you say you're right with no dialogue? But I guess you could fault both sides with that. And that leads to the next topic of discussion, all of the other organizations that attach themselves to this statement. Now, you have a movement called Black Lives Matter. You have other movements that are just anti-fascism, and they claim to support the movement of Black Lives Matter or whatever. But I don't feel as though that a obvious statement needs to have an organization attached to it. That's just my personal feeling. As such an obvious statement, all you would need to do is simply argue the facts and let everything else fall into place. But for whatever reason, they feel as though people need to get organized and have leaders or whatnot, and have a particular agenda and have a model, and that people need to start adhering to the model. And now you have all this confusion because everybody isn't on the same page, and everybody's there for a different reason. Everybody believes that the model should have a different premise and have a whole different direction than what the statement was just stating in itself, that Black Lives Matter. But now it means a whole different, it has a whole new meaning to it. And these people feel as though anybody, if they truly agree with the statement, they need to act within a certain parameter. And they have to have other certain coinciding beliefs attached to the statement, which isn't necessarily true. Like, you don't need to say Black Lives Matter to believe that Black lives do matter. You don't need to say it. You don't need to post it on your Facebook wall. You don't need to do any of this other things, all these other little telltale signs that some people believe are required. So now when you do that and not understand the nature of people and the nature of social society, and understand that people can tell falsehoods in order to gain your favor, you have everybody saying the statement, Black Lives Matter, and then they use that to say that they are exempt from any wrongdoings of any people who identify as black or who are identified as black. So basically what I'm saying is, you put yourself in a situation where you don't know who your true adversaries are. You don't know who's there for whatever reasons. You don't know anybody's true intent. And that causes other situations to happen, like when you want to get your organization mobilized and to do a demonstration, a protest, and you bring your people to the I guess the place where you're doing your demonstration, and you have this whole other group who has a whole different ideology and a whole different belief system and a whole different purpose of direction, and they start doing things like throwing glass bottles at the police, throwing bricks at the police, throwing bricks at establishments, and going around looting and rioting. And now those people who are there allegedly for your same purpose are now putting in actions that are contradictory to your beliefs and to what direction that you think that this movement, this organized movement, should now be heading towards. And you get everybody put under the same umbrella, if you want to use, I guess, metaphoric terms. And people are saying, oh, anybody who stands for this statement is now a looter, a rioter, a criminal. And that's where you get problems. So you don't know who is backing these other ideologies. You don't know who is organizing these other groups. But all of these groups are allegedly meeting under the same pretenses. And it could be your adversary. You're saying, okay, we have this movement. All we need is a few of our people out there, 5 or 6 or whatever, throw a few bricks at the target and go and take some TVs out or whatever. And now there is a backlash to this whole entire statement that was just obvious from the beginning of Black Lives Matter, because now they're going to associate it with looting and rioting. Now we have the formula of what we're all sitting in right now, of this mess of what we're all associated with right now. So then you start having people thinking that, you know, certain people are getting preferential treatment, and they're going out there saying this statement, saying Black Lives Matter. What about the rest of lives? Don't all lives matter? But again, all lives weren't the ones being in question. Other people don't get the same narrative as black people. They don't get Chinese on Chinese crime. They don't get Vietnamese on Vietnamese crime. They don't get British on British crime. They don't get Caucasian on Caucasian crime. But people say all the time, black on black crime. And they even mention it when they say, oh, if you really felt as though Black Lives Matter, what about the blacks who end black lives? The blacks who end black lives are criminals. How can you protest to a criminal? They already sit outside of society. So therefore, if you were displaying your grievances with the criminal element, it would take a completely different form than when you're displaying your grievances with a allegedly legal entity or the government itself. It would take a completely different form. You wouldn't be out there marching on the streets protesting criminals. Why would they care? They don't abide by legislation, so there will be no changes in laws that will get criminals to act different because they already sit outside of law. So if you're expecting the same reaction for a black criminal killing an innocent black person rather than a representative of the government killing an innocent black person, you would be foolish. So just because black people aren't taking any type of action that you would understand with your limited scope on the situation as in response to a black child being killed by a black criminal, it doesn't mean that no action is being taken. Of course, if you're not in that community, if you don't go to that community's church, if you don't deal with that community's people on a daily basis, you wouldn't know what actions they're taking. It's just like I don't know what actions that they took after the Columbine shooting. I don't know what actions that they took after the Jonesboro school shooting. I don't know what actions that they took after the Virginia Tech shooting. I don't know what actions were took after the Sandy Hook shooting because I don't live in any of those communities. But I don't sit here and assume that they took no action at all just because I'm not aware of it. So now, since we're still talking about all lives matter, people say that that's just another unfollowable statement. All lives matter. Like, what is, particularly wrong with that? There's nothing particularly wrong with the statement, but since we all speak, English here, well, most of us speak English here in the United States, and that English is a language that most of its words derive their meaning from their context. And the context isn't just what's said in the specific statement. It is also what's said before the statement, and sometimes even after the statement, that you can figure out the true meaning, the true cause of a statement. Now, if all lives matter was said first, as in it was not responding to anything, it was just a statement that is being displayed or vocalized, of course there will be absolutely no problem with it. But just like I said, with any of the other romantic languages, romantic meaning Roman-like or Roman-derived, that has nothing to do with courtship or intimacy. Romantic means Roman-like. So just like with all of the other romantic languages like Spanish, French, English, but context-derived. Most words have context. And since all lives matter was said in response and opposition to Black Lives Matter, as somewhat of a rebuttal, like, oh, you're not giving credit to other lives. You're not taking credit from other lives. Other lives weren't in question. Black lives were in question for whatever reason. But since we're not giving credit to other lives, let me correct you by letting you know that indeed all lives matter. But essentially, that's what Black Lives Matter meant in the first place. But since Black lives were at question, all lives matter wouldn't have made as much of an impact. That's the whole point in making a statement, is for your point to get across. Saying, hey, all lives matter. You can't treat that person like that. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, of course. I know all the lives I care about matter. I didn't care about that guy's life because he was black. So then you have to say, hey man, Black Lives Matter. Just because that guy's a black guy doesn't mean you can treat him like that. Like, of course, by my actions, I wasn't aware that I had to give credence to a black life. This is why I put my knee on his neck for like 9 minutes. I thought we could just do this to black lives. That's what the actions say. Like, people can make whatever statement that they want and try to say that it means this or that, but we have this another expression, talk is cheap. Your actions have to reflect your words in order for people to understand what your words actually mean. So when you say all lives matter, but your actions don't reflect that all lives matter, when you say that you understand that Black Lives Matter, but your actions don't reflect that you understand that Black Lives Matter, then that's where we're going to have disagreements. That's where we're going to display our grievances. That's where we're going to have protests. So now that we're back on the subject of protests, let's speak about what is effective protesting. Protests nowadays, in order to be considered effective by society at large, has to be a peaceful protest. And I put that in quotations because it is an oxymoronic phrase. The point of a protest is to bring up a grievance. Grievance with another party is a conflict. Conflicts cannot be peaceful. But yet we put that term peaceful protest as in opposed to a riot or, looting or people being violent. But nonviolent does not mean peaceful. So let's go back to the 60s. And we have people like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, all doing demonstrations. Some people had different ideologies, whatever. But what America tends to act as though they celebrate a lot is Mr. Martin Luther King or Dr. Martin Luther King. And they claim that his whole platform was a peaceful protest, which is not true. That is a falsehood. Dr. King's platform was nonviolent civil disobedience, meaning as though they would not conduct themselves as peaceful bystanders. They would tell their grievances to who's ever around, whether they felt as though that they cared or not, in order to spread awareness of their movement. And they would do so in a non-violent manner. But being non-violent doesn't mean non-confrontational. And if you are sitting there baiting a confrontation, you are not being peaceful. The whole point of the movement back in the 60s was to cause a confrontation. It's the whole point, was to not be peaceful. There was even a slogan back then where people say, no justice, no peace. So if that was their platform, how can you say that the man endorsed peaceful protests? A peaceful protest was something that, somebody added on, not being fully articulate or aware of the situation and saying, oh, these people aren't being violent, so therefore they're being peaceful. But no, violence and peace are not directly associated. Like, you are considered to be disturbing the peace if you're playing loud music. But loud music is not violent. So therefore, you can be non-violent and be confrontational and not be peaceful. And that was the whole platform that Martin Luther King did his demonstrations on. So they did not speak with the people, their oppressors, their adversaries beforehand and say, we're going to do a demonstration at this time of day. We're going to march down this street to this location. We're going to spend this amount of time doing such. And then after that, we're all just going to go home. No conflict involved. No dogs, no fire hose, no riot police and tear gas grenades. None of that stuff is going to happen. We're just going to go from point A to point B and make sure you don't have traffic in our way. And then we're going to go on our merry way after we're done. No. They went out. They had their plan of action already ready. And they executed that plan, unbeknownst to the members in society who were not a part of the demonstration. And then those people will have to ask, what is this? Why are these people marching down the street? Why are there so many of them? Why do they seem organized? What do those signs say? What do they mean by no justice, no peace? What is going on in our nation? That was the whole point of the movement back in the 60s, to spread awareness, to let people know at large the grievances that the greater black community had with the government. But nowadays it has become perverse. It's people literally sitting down and making deals with the people who they are claiming are their aggressors, are their adversaries. And they're saying, we're going to go to XYZ Street and we're going to have a demonstration and we're only going to be there for a couple hours and then we're going to go home afterwards. And nobody has to risk anything. And then you would say, why would people do such? The whole point is to have some type of reaction. They would do such in order to gain some type of sense of self-gratification. That's why people protest nowadays. Everybody's already aware of most of what happens before the protest even starts. Then they get organized on some type of social media platform. They get a representative or representatives to go out and make their deal before they protest with whatever legislative body or police force, where they're going to be doing the demonstration. And then they do their little demonstration, and then they have a lot of fun, then they go home. Unless somebody's throwing bricks at Target, then that's when the tear gas comes out. But nobody had to throw a brick at anything for people to come to adverse side effects of their demonstration back in the 60s. No, they just simply went out and did their actual protests, and the people responded the way that they did. The whole point in the nonviolent disobedience was to show the reaction that black people get when they try to stand up for themselves, and for it to be documented. It was to pull out the media. The media had no idea what was going on. They actually got blitzed, blindsided by the whole altercation. And then what was recorded was cops shooting these people who were being nonviolent with rubber bullets, sicking police dogs on these people who are being nonviolent, shooting these people who are being nonviolent with fire hose and things of that nature. A lot of people getting hurt for being nonviolent. And then the nation had to address something. Is this how we are? Is this how we treat people just because they disagree with the established system? Do we ignore them to the point where they have to literally put their lives on the line just to get at the speaking table? That's what a real protest was. What we have nowadays is just nonsense. I'm pretty sure that there's lots of people who disagree with what I said and say that there's a lot of benefits and merits that could come from doing these public demonstrations and whatnot and what have you. But it will all boil down to self-gratification. And the thing is, we're still using methodology that our adversaries have already built up countermeasures for. They already know how to deal with people protesting in the manner of showing up to do a public demonstration. I'm not saying at all that I agree with violent forms of protesting, which is riots and things of that nature, because that's what a violent protest is. It's a riot. It's just like the Boston Tea Party. That was a riot done by or organized by some of the founding fathers of this nation that is completely accepted by most people in this nation, and that led up to a lot of other things that went on in Boston up to the Boston Massacre. Or it was the Boston Massacre first. I'm not sure, but it's whatever. The whole point is that a riot is also a form of protest. I don't agree with any forms of public demonstration in order to file some type of grievance. I believe that they're all antiquated and none of them have a true purpose in our current sphere of society. These videos that I'm doing right now and the statements that people make on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, what have you, this is the form of protest that we have now. This is where you gain the most ground. This is where you wage your battles. People should not be putting their lives on the line more to prove a statement, because it simply doesn't work. There's more detriments that can happen. People misconstrue views and things of that nature. But I'm running out of time. Maybe I'll spend more time talking on this topic another day. But thank you for your time. Again, this is a raw, unedited video. If you see any editing whatsoever, don't take that as my contextual meaning. Thank you.